industry suffered disproportionately to all other sectors, and we now need to prepare for long-term implications of dealing with COVID-19 into 2021 and potentially beyond. The Arts Council of Ireland, Fáilte and Tourism Ireland, local authorities and development agencies all over Ireland have identified the strategic importance of festivals and events in their strategies over at least the last 20 years. The event industry underpinning these events of national strategic importance is unique, intricate and often misunderstood. Our front of house comprises of a bustling calendar of events, world-class entertainment and a kaleidoscope of sporting, business, corporate, leisure, cultural and social experiences. This often distracts from the ecosystem behind the scenes. Here you will find an industry powered by resilience, determination and devotion to the promotion of our arts, business, culture, heritage, innovation and tourism sectors, while supporting the national economy and, most crucially, delivering experiences that exceed expectations, entertain, connect communities and enhance our attendees' quality of life. While we are grateful and commend the Government for its prompt and effective application of valuable supports that immediately provided a degree of comfort across our industry, we are filled with apprehension when considering our industry's ability to generate income while we await the lifting of restrictions. With no definitive start date, combined with the knowledge that even when that date comes, it will not mean that our industry can immediately activate and resume business as usual, we understand that it will be slow but steady progress. The public health safeguarding measures that have been implemented by the Government to date and the anticipation duration of these measures, while absolutely necessary, essentially mean that the majority of our businesses, organisers and workers are simply unable to generate revenue at present and many for the foreseeable future. The situation is unprecedented and absolutely devastating. The Irish event industry, usually an extremely ambitious, active and competitive industry, is facing a prolonged hibernation period which has already impacted our entire ecosystem on a short, medium and long-term basis. In addition to the impact on businesses, COVID-19 has resulted in the loss of livelihood and potential loss of industry-specific skilled workers who may abandon the employment in the industry in the future. It is important to note that many of the specialist roles required in the event industry are highly skilled, industry-specific and were in high demand and short supply coming into this crisis. Due to the seasonal nature of the industry, with January and February being notoriously quiet and inactive, a large portion of our workforce had not yet been employed and as such did not qualify under the current TWSS system. In addition to a large segment of workers, artists, performers and entertainers excluded, many festival, events and cultural activities are also sit outside the remit of Arts Council and Fáilte Ireland funding criteria. Therefore, the support package allocated to the Arts Council and Fáilte Ireland will not and could not adequately filter down through the industry ecosystem. We are now calling on our Government to recognise that this sector is one of the last remaining sectors that has not been provided with a pathway to or a date for reopening, and as such requires a unique suite of supports, and recognise as part of that process that the additional funding provided to the Arts Council will at best reach only a portion of our sector. Recognise the event industry in its own right, to acknowledge it for the valuable economic sector it is, and assign direct responsibility for this sector to the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and immediately establish an event industry task force to engage with and support the industry to deliver a roadmap and future sustainability. Continue the temporary wage support scheme for our sector until such time as restrictions with regards to mass gatherings are removed. Protect and support each part of our sector, our workers, volunteers, performers, venues, SMEs, promoters, our smorgasbord of community events right up to our national hallmark events, and our stakeholders, to ensure that our ecosystem endures and that our professionalism, expertise and vital skill sets are retained. Enable and resource the event industry to utilise this recovery period to address the new challenges presented by COVID-19, improve industry best practice, standards and professional competency, safeguarding our ability to deliver a safe and successful future. I thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss these issues today. My colleague and I are happy to take questions from the committee on this matter, and I would request that you open page 2 of our submission, as we will be referring to it in the Q&A.
Thank you very much. Our first speaker is the Deputy O'Snuddy.
Three very different presentations, but totally linked together in the commonality of the arts sector in Irish society, and obviously the industry that supports it, both the industry that is state-funded in somewhat, and those that are and have been totally reliant on their own funding. And I want to thank us in particular for coming here today and alluding to some of the problems, because in the short presentations you are only doing that, and there is a much bigger presentation from each of you which highlights some of the issues. I know some of these issues myself personally, coming from a family of artists and musicians, and also my mother's a sculptor, so I have some idea of what goes on in the art world, but in particular with the brothers who are musicians, what goes on behind the scenes when organising events. And kind of we've all, I think, seen the cancelled concerts and events over the years, and especially in the last 6 months because of COVID. And one of the things that we often forget about, we might have bought a ticket for an event and we feel a bit downhearted it's not going ahead. But behind every one of those events, there's a huge array of people, stage hands, production crew, all of the like, and sometimes we forget about those, and each one of those are very skilled, but also in very precarious positions, because if the events don't happen, they don't get paid often, and that's what we forget about. And I think it's timely that you have come before us, and especially given that the arts sector in particular, and those involved in the events management and production, are going to be one of the last sectors of our society to recover. And recover is only just coming back to a level. I don't know whether it was Angela said, somebody said that the artists and that, and most in this sector, kind of survived on less than the minimum wage, what is it, 70%? So you're recovering to hopefully a lot better than what was there, and a better appreciation of what was there before. So I want to ask a few questions, and some of them will be directed, and some of them hopefully the three can cover in their answers, whether it's to myself or others. The one is that, given that the live events and the art sector is going to be the last to recover, do you believe that now's the time to set up an industry task force to look at the best ways to proceed in developing the supports and encouraging the decision needed to provide for the industry, not just in the next couple of months, but over the next year, in the hope that by this time next year the industry will and the art sector will be fully recovered? Another idea, I think it was EPIC mentioned the question on VAT in their submission. That VAT on, in this industry is at 23% on labour, whereas in other sectors it's at 13.5%. And has this had any support from the Department of Finance to look at reducing this, and how much would be saved for the industry if that happened? I don't know whether you have a figure of how much VAT is paid annually from this sector. And then the figure of 1.3 billion is what the events and art industry is worth, and that's mentioned in a number of submissions, and that shows that it's a thriving and viable industry. Can you see it recovering to that level within a year, or is it going to take a number of years? And with that in mind, what is the response from the department thus far to trying to work towards that, and trying to ensure that we retain the skills that are required?
I'd be happy to take one of those. Certainly, in terms of the response of the department, it's been a very open and positive conversation with the Department of Arts. I'll let my colleagues talk about the VAT, because I think they're far more briefed on that. But in terms of the task force, I think an immediate cross-departmental task force, like the one that was called for in the Arts Council's report, would be really, really useful. And I would think it would be very useful immediately so that this sector can contribute into July's stimulus package. And I know we all want to see the PUP payment extended, and I think a VAT conversation in that stimulus package is essential for both our sector and the wider tourism sector and hospitality sector as well.
Just, I suppose there's two questions that probably are directed, to ourselves and EIAI. But the VAT question, we don't have a figure on the total, but the big issue on for us is that a lot of the members that we represent, and EPIC represents about 2,000 SMEs and sole traders within the industry. A lot of the work they do is for smaller community events, stuff that's much smaller. They do a lot of work for government agencies, for Fáilte Ireland. They do an awful lot of work for businesses that are not VAT registered. So by having to charge 23% on top of their own fee, they just become more expensive and they generate less work as a result. With regards to the question on the response from the department, EPIC is a reasonably new group. We're 6-7 weeks old. We've had initial discussions with the department. We expect to sit down with Fáilte Ireland in the coming weeks, but what we don't have is what the hoteliers and the vintners and everybody else has. We don't have a roadmap. We don't yet have an outline, from government. We are available, and as I'm sure Angela is, as I'm sure Elaine is, to sit down with anybody and put that roadmap together. But we don't have it right now, and until we get it, it's going to be difficult. You asked if the industry will recover 100%. Everybody touched on it. I think every submission today has the word innovation in it, and the reason for that is it's a business of innovators. That's what we do. We adapt. We do it on a daily basis on sites, be they in a theatre or in a green field. It will recover. Right now, we just need to sustain it so that when it can recover, we still have the staff and the skill set to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Do you wish?
Talk about the skill set. My own organisation, just at the weekend gone by, and Sharon mentioned it would have been a hectic weekend in the event scene, and I personally would have had a team of about 60 people working. Those are highly skilled people. The danger of this, and I'd like to congratulate the government in the scheme, the payment scheme, that has kept my staff together, even though they're not working. But if the scheme runs out, our business will survive, but we don't want to lose any of the skill set. There's an enormous skill set in this industry that have the passion, the knowledge, and the enthusiasm to do a very successful job. And as already mentioned, these people are never seen before the stage, they're always seen behind. And it's congratulations to those team of people. And it's something this country doesn't want to lose, those highly skilled people. They're vital to the industry, they're vital to our industry.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a further question, Deputy Snoddy?
No, that's all.
Circular? No. Deputy Brophy, sorry. Are you taking 10 minutes, Deputy Brophy, or 5? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'd like to really follow up from the last question. I think, unfortunately, and it's an awful thing to be saying to people, but I think, unfortunately, one of the big problems you face as an industry group and as representatives is that because primarily of the health criteria, not even the financial side, but the health regulations, the actual attitude which the public will have to the type of events that you're mostly involved with, I see a situation where I think it's very optimistic thinking to believe that there will be any substantial change between now and this time next year. I think it's going to be a longer process of recovery. And based on that, because before this session started, I just noticed that in New York, they were announcing that there might be no theatres at all reopening this year, which is a very stark decision. So allowing for the fact that it is going to be a longer process, what are the key things that you as groups want to see to enable, if government was picking out of July going forward? Because while VAT would help if there was a trading situation, when there's no business, the VAT situation isn't as important. So what are the real key things that need to be done for you that will enable you to deal with a situation where realistically it could be at least another 12 months before there's any meaningful return to the type of large-scale public events being allowed to happen, because the health guidelines mightn't change until that period of time, until we have a vaccine of some sort or until we have medicine. What do you see that you need from government to enable that industry, which is a brilliant industry, by the way, to be kept intact, so as that we have it in this country ready to go when we do get the turnaround? I don't know who wants to come in first on that.
I'd be delighted to take that. As my colleague Angela Dorgan mentioned earlier, some of the immediate and urgent requirements that the sector has will be addressed through the extension of the PUP for the remainder of the year. But you rightly point out that we need long-term action. And so within our submission, we are also calling on the Department to build on the great work that has been done in relation to the Arts Council and to commit to allocating 30 million for next year to allow the Arts Council and the funded arts sector to be able to sustain and to survive. But in addition to that, the tax reform and the tax regime incentive change that we're looking for is something that will allow arts organisations who are very busy fundraising all of the time to try and better address the deficits that they will find in other sectors of their business. At the same time, we know that local authorities and regional development is equally important to the survival of the sector. This is not just about central government funding. The local authorities play a massive role in the local arts of all of your constituencies. And we would be very keen that local arts funding in local authority budget lines, whether it's for venues, whether it's the art centres of Letterkenny, Bray, Sheamsa, Dunleary, wherever they are, that those funding, those budget lines are ring-fenced and protected, not just now in 2020 when there's a crisis, but right into 2021. And finally, in the longer term, we're looking for the pilot that is promised for UBI in the Programme for Government. We're looking for that pilot to be expedited and expanded beyond what's promised, in order that individual artists and arts workers can consider some viable future going forward. Because, as you suggest, even when arts organisations like my own can reopen, we will be doing so on a capacity of 15%, making it very difficult to be viable for many months to come.
Thank you. Could I just hear on the commercial side, on the EPIC side, you know, what you particularly, I appreciate, I've seen the submissions and I've seen the range of things, but if you take it that so many of the members of the type of people who provide the services that you're involved with are small, really get up and go companies that are self-employed individuals who work on events and who really, what do they need? What is it that you're saying that if there was one or two key things that we as a committee would be recommending to government, based on the fact that this could be quite a long time, what is it that you'd like to see us recommending?
Can I take that? On behalf of EPIC, in reply to Deputy Brophy, I do hope you're not right about how long it'll take, but I have a fear you may be. What we need to do is keep our members alive and well enough not to have to take jobs in other sectors, so that when we go back to work, we have the skills that we've taken so long to build up. For our individual members, that's to keep the COVID payments going till we go back to work. It's support from the banks for their loans and their mortgages. For our SMEs, it's grants to help with rent and rates, and a reduction of commercial rates or holiday for commercial rates, so that we can pay for warehouses full of equipment, and the VAT question we've already addressed.
Thank you, Ms Ridley. Thank you, Deputy Brophy. Who's the first involved to speak? 5 minutes and then, okay, yeah, go ahead, Deputy McGuinness.
Could I just go back to the question raised by about the local authorities and their funding? And in spite of the fact that it is a local authority funding, it will have now to come from central government too, because the local authorities are challenged. And in Kilkenny, I'm acutely aware of the huge role that the arts and all of the network around arts projects and arts festivals and so on, how important they are to the economy. So I think that I would suggest to you that there needs to be a substantial input through the local authorities of funding from central government to support such festivals as the Arts Week, Rhythm and Roots, and event centres then, like, for example, in Kilkenny, the Watergate Theatre. So there's a range of supports that are there through the local authority that will be challenged in terms of the financial circumstances of local authorities. It would be for central government, I think, to come in and act on that. And I would hope that in highlighting your case to government departments, that you would think of that fact, that the funding there has dried up and it's absolutely critical that it be replaced with a direct funding input from central government. And likewise, I mentioned the Watergate Theatre, but they're using their theatre for virtual performances and so on, and that type of innovation needs to be supported too. So in terms of the Arts Council then, you mentioned the figure of 20 million and then looking for 30 million for 2021. Have you factored into that request the fact that an awful lot of what happens in the world of art will really not pick up at all until the middle to the end of next year? And what has been the response of government to that predicament?
Directly speaking to the Arts Council, 20 million, which the advisory committee that I sat on behalf of the NCFA, that 20 million, the way it breaks down, and to come back to Deputy Brophy's question, how will you continue? A big chunk of that funding from the 20 million will go directly to artists to make work. So that the festivals and the stages that, you know, entire sectors work to bring, and that background, and people who work in theatres, so that there's artists' work to present, I think is very important. So that that 9.2 million that the Arts Council has ring-fenced for individual artists, writers, theatre makers, musicians, is really welcome. I think the kind of referring to in there as well, there's a substantial fund for helping arts organisations to adapt to an online world. There's also an ask that the government work with the European Commission on Article 13 to provide fairer pay to artists for online work, because that's where a lot of them are being driven to make a living. So that there's a European-wide campaign which Ireland has contributed to, and there are activities like that that can help, and a substantial other fund from the Arts Council will be spent on helping local art centres and venues to adapt to COVID as we start to come back. And also, to refer back to Deputy Brophy, I think EPIC and Elaine would agree that we are the sector who will coax everybody out. We have, you know, we were the sector that kept everybody company in isolation during COVID, and it will be back to us and the skills that are in this entire sector, and that we can't afford to lose. It will be back to us to coax people back out so that it may and can happen quicker.
But the response from government then, in terms of providing the necessary funding, in the context of not being able to get back fully until mid-21 or late 21, I think it's important from the figures that you present that they reflect the possibility of a longer recovery for the sector, and then the need to support EPIC and the other parts of that industry that act behind the scenes. And I'm hoping that you have that the figures are big enough in presenting to government to capture that possibility.
Yeah, we have 30 million in, I know that EPIC have other needs for their SMEs and loans and supports for those companies to recover. We have factored in 30 million for the Arts Council and an increase in funding for Culture Ireland for 2021 as well, as the sector starts to recover.
If you wouldn't mind if I can... You, Deputy McGuinness.
Sorry, wouldn't mind if we just add to what Angela said. Like, we are 100% behind the funding that has gone to the Arts Council, but it is the funded arts sector. And the non-funded sector in regards to turnover and ticket sales is substantially bigger. And you ask about what the response has been from government to that sector. Right now we have a wage subsidy scheme up to the end of August, and that is essentially the response we've had from government. You ask about the long-term recovery. If that doesn't extend until we're back to something like capacity, we won't have a long-term recovery, because the people and the skill sets that we keep talking about will leave this industry. So, they are the big asks. There will be little bits of work. They will be at reduced capacity. Maybe venues can operate at 25, 30%. They can only operate at that capacity with the continuation of the wage subsidy, with a rates break, and with substantial other help as listed in the submissions. And I think the 3 submissions have similar, crossover of requests. But it will take that entire raft of requests to keep these people and this skill set within the industry, so that in 6 months or 3 months or 9 months or whatever it is, that we can go back to work.
Thanks very much.
To that,
Brophy.
local-
Sorry, I'm a little bit tired. It's the 3rd session. Deputy Burke, my apologies.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your presentations here. And I know it's a very challenging time, especially for all the artists and those involved in the events industry. Could I just ask, in relation to the artists, you're talking about 54,000 artists. I presume quite a very small proportion of them would have benefited under the COVID payment of the €250 per week. Have we any idea of the kind of numbers that would have been benefited? Is it less than 25%, or is it even smaller than that?
The most recent figures we had from the department were 14,000, but that was about 4 weeks ago. And then the department also set up a direct email for those having problems qualifying. So that would be another ask, that there's a broader criteria for all of our sectors to qualify, when that we hope.
And when you're talking about a broader mechanism, what kind of changes would you think are necessary in order to bring more people in under the system?
Well, as Elaine referred to, when March 12th happened, you were able to claim the PUP if your work was interrupted, because everybody we're referring to makes hay literally during the summer. So it would be our big time kicks off late March right to October. So there would have been a substantial amount of people that all 3 organisations represent who wouldn't have been working and therefore wouldn't have qualified.
My understanding also in relation to COVID payments, say you were working the particular week, I think in the end of February. If you hadn't been working, say, for 4 weeks in the period from the 1st of January to the end of February, then it's the average over 9 weeks is taken into account, as I understand it. And I think that would probably have affected people as well. Am I correct in that?
Would have, yeah, because you would have been talking December, January, February, which is a quiet time in the events industry.
Okay. You referred there to changes in the reform of the tax system in order, I suppose, because the charity section now is, the people in relation who normally would give to fundraising, that's been extremely hard, very hard hit. But you refer to reform in our tax regime to incentivise and encourage charitable giving to keep arts organisations in business. What kind of reform are you talking about in that area?
In terms of as you know, and you've picked up on a large number of arts organisations and funded arts organisations are charities. We enjoy charitable status partly for the benefit and the privilege of being able to fundraise. So our colleagues in the charity sector have done a massive amount of research on the kinds of reform that would be required to bring Ireland in line with other countries that really actually incentivise investment and charitable giving. The Community Foundation, for example, have submitted an incredibly useful document which would propose changes to the tax system so that investment in the arts could be comparable with other investment, like in film in particular. But in addition to that, that charitable giving by corporations and individuals could be much better facilitated and resourced by a revision of our system. I understand from our charity colleagues, our arts colleagues and our colleagues in Benefacts that there are a number of models currently ready for review. So we'd be delighted to suggest models that Ireland could investigate in order to make giving to our sector a little bit more attractive in the way that it is in other European.
Would it be possible for that documentation to be made available to us?
We can submit that to the committee, absolutely.
And just in relation to the, there's a lot of international companies in this country. There are an awful lot of, I suppose, very big Irish companies here as well. Should we be doing more to try and encourage them to sponsor an artist? Because we haven't really seen that here in Ireland compared to other jurisdictions. And I'm just wondering, is it all tied into tax, or does it have to be tax related in order to bring about the change in that area?
We would argue that there is increased and increasing capacity to raise and to do really well in terms of fundraising in our sector, but it is very hard to make that actually plausible and viable without the kind of tax regime change that could support that more widely. We feel you won't find us wanting in terms of our ability to be entrepreneurial and to raise money.
But I would say that, to the larger companies, it shouldn't all be tax-based. There's a huge contribution. If you give sponsorship to someone who's involved in the arts community, that has a huge benefit for the local community, and therefore there's a benefit then for the employees of that company as well. I mean, that should be an approach as well.
Certainly, I wouldn't discount that at all. I think the two go hand in glove. And an organisation like the Arts Council, for example, has heavily invested in a programme called RAISE, which will allow organisations to build their capacity to deliver in that regard. But right now, I suppose, it is a very difficult time for organisations to be trying to generate revenue from those kinds of sources. So
but I think you would agree that we're a bit behind as regards corporate sponsorship here in Ireland compared to other jurisdictions.
I'd agree with you there.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Deputy Brophy. Who's the second? Deputy Smith? Yeah, 5 minutes. Is it you're taking 5, isn't it?
Yeah, please,
Yeah.
that's all right. Is that okay?
Sorry, who's next? Oh,
Sorry. Oh, that's fine. I don't mind.
I'm afraid I don't know. I have had Deputy McGuinness down, and after that, I don't know who's next.
Doesn't matter, Eamon. You can go ahead. Go on ahead, yeah? No problem.
I don't.
Sorry, gosh, so used to standing up here and we don't stand up in committees. Now the time is very tight, and unfortunately there's a lot of things and issues I'd like to raise, but I'll try to keep my questions short, and we'll try to keep the replies short to get as much in as we can. Can you confirm in relation to the events industry that it's not generally state subsidised, but that it now requires urgent assistance? And in that context, would I understand that reform and refinement of the PUP and the temporary wage subsidy scheme is very, very urgent, that it needs to deal with the seasonal work issue, with the part-time work issue as work begins to become available very slowly, and that it needs to be continued at least to next summer as a first step, because the events industry will certainly not get going to the very earliest till next March. That's question number one. The second one is there's talk about an industry task force. I take it this is very important, but when would it have to report so that steps could be actually taken on foot of a task force report so that it would save the arts and the events industry? And the third question, you mentioned rates and rents. How big an overhead are these? And how important would the waiver of particularly rates be? And also the restart-up grant is limited to 10,000. Would many arts and events industry players be paying more than €10,000 a year? And is this too low a cap on the rates rebate for 2019?
Respond to your first question there, yes. In relation to the support payments, we can confirm that at the very least that they continue till next summer. We are looking at an entire season lost this year, and we will only be getting back on our feet and working towards a new season next year. With regard to the task force, in our opinion, it needs to be immediately established. We have questions within industry that are delaying our progress. Our local authorities, for example, one of the largest promoters of local community events all over the country, face the same challenges as our entire industry. We have questions and nowhere to go for answers. So it is absolutely imperative that that is in place straight away. And in response to when we would expect to have information, we would hope that we would begin to start delivering reports initially to the July fiscal stimulus package, but also to industry as soon as possible. Only by trialling events and trialling our way through this are we going to be able to build these events slowly from the ground up to ensure that they're safe spaces, that everything has been checked, and that our customers and attendees are confident in the spaces themselves.
To what Elaine has said there, and to, I suppose, pick out little bits from your questions, Deputy. With regard to rates, there are a number of non-funded venues and theatres, places like the Bord Gáis, the Gaiety, the Olympia, multiple others around the country that have exceptionally high rates bills and are currently paying them in full. Those theatres are empty, the seats are empty, the staff are not there. The question regarding the PUP, the nature of this business is that it's day here, 3 days there, 4 days there, but the big issue going forward will be that as things start to reopen and reopen slowly, whereby somebody might pick up a day's work or 2 days' work, will they then be removed from the COVID payment or the wage subsidy scheme? My understanding is that it could be up to 6 weeks before they could get back onto it. That will make it very difficult. And then with regard to the 10,000 euro, the grant, it's a case-by-case basis. There will be a multitude of businesses for which this will be far, far too low.
Something that hasn't been mentioned, but the word grants would be very beneficial to our industry. There are many companies in this country involved in the industry that have large stocks in their warehousing that's been inactive for the year, and that would be a lot of money would be owed on that to the banks. And as we know, the banks are only giving certain limits to their extension schemes. But I know from other people in the industry, like there could be up to 20 million worth of stock around this country of equipment for this major industry. And I think that should be considered within this committee, if you'd be grateful to look at that in terms of supporting that side of the business.
And to echo both of those, the task force I think is needed immediately. I think the PUP extension, along with other sectors, would need to be, we feel, in the stimulus package in July. Along with, I think the task force will be needed and essential to developing a roadmap to how the entire sector does get back to work and how we can support government in delivering that, because we are the people with the talent and the know-how and the international networks. And I think with regard to the rates, there are a lot of artist studios, there are venues, big and small, whose rates are higher and lower than the 10,000, but specifically there are artist studios and venues and practice rooms where that would fall below the 10. So I think to bring it to bring it down for them, or to have a rates holiday in those situations would be very beneficial to the sector.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Deputy Matthews.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I understand the difficulties the arts are facing and the devastation that this pandemic has brought upon the arts sector, and I understood the difficulties you were facing before COVID as well. I had served as a director in Wicklow's Mermaid Arts Centre, and I know the amount of work that goes into organising and applying for funding and attracting artists and supporting artists, the outreach programmes that go on to give people access to the arts that may never have access to it, and the benefits that brings, and the disappointment when a show or a performance doesn't go well, or the joy when it does go well. I've also worked, experience working in event production as well, and the huge skill set that exists out there across that behind the scenes that you referenced earlier on in terms of lighting and sound and power and construction and set design and that whole range of support industries that are there as well. And it's huge, and it brings great benefit and joy to so many people. My worry is that, you've referenced it, if you lose a full season of work, you're going to break up those seasonal partnerships and relationships that exist out there across all the sector. And they're relationships that have built up over years where people know how to work together so well that you lose them. And that's going to have a massive impact as we try to reboot and grow the arts sector again. In one of the submissions, the Events Industry Ireland submission, you talk about more than half of the businesses in the Irish events industry may not survive 2020. Does that indicate that there are certain sectors or certain places within the arts sector that we need to direct funding more urgently than in other sectors? And also, you've covered funding quite a bit in the submissions, but one of the things I always found was the inconsistency in funding was one of the biggest issues that artists face, that the short timelines to apply for funding, or that it would change from year to year, and I'm sure that is something that would benefit the arts sector greatly as we move out of this. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Can we identify those half of industries in that submission that may?
Thank you, Deputy. We've talked a lot about ecosystem. We've talked a lot about the interrelationship of all of these sectors. Mermaid Arts Centre is a good example of a venue with 242 seats, which, when it reopens, presumably will have 15% of that capacity available to it. However, it's also a really useful example because, as a locally funded arts centre, it sits in the middle of that ecosystem that's so fundamental to all of us here. Mermaid Arts Centre, for example, has a really fine tradition of funded arts. It also interacts with the commercial music sector consistently and successfully, and has done so with Bray Jazz Festival over the years. It's a brilliant example of how fundamental the two-tiered approach of local authority funding, even if it does come from central government, and Arts Council funding can actually maximise the input and output for the citizen. So, you know, that the attendance of Mermaid Arts Centre might be 35,000 people a year is something that we're going to have to invest in and sustain. So I would be saying that there are key points across all of our presentations which could benefit from particular targeted attention. But targeted measures are one thing. We also need universal action. We've identified that the local arts centres infrastructure and the local authority budgets are major, and I would be keen to emphasise that that affects every single person here, and that investment in that area will be crucial going forward.
Matthews, have you any?
There's no doubt, Deputy, that the people you talk about and the teams you talk about and the relationships are the kind of what I would describe as my summer family. You know, the people I only see from April to September, that I don't have to read stories to, but, you know, we work together. But those people, you know, just because you're the stage manager on the main stage at Electric Picnic doesn't mean that you don't spend a portion of the rest of the year, you know, in the Abbey or the Gate. Like, this is an industry where we all work together. It's people pop up on TV sets that then pop up, you know, on an outdoor show a couple of weeks later. The problem we have at the moment is that the entire industry is stopped. And, you know, you're 100% correct. These groupings, these companies, these SMEs, they will be lost and they will be broken up, and they will, you know, those relationships, but equally those events and those businesses will not come back unless there is, you know, a raft of supports that have been requested, you know, from the NCFA campaign, from EIAI and from ourselves at EPIC. And we need the bulk of those to come through over the next, and immediately, you know, as Angela said, it needs to come through in the July stimulus package. It's not something we can wait until the depths of winter for. You know, when that comes, it will be too late.
Thank you, Mr. Dunne. And Deputy Matthews, thank you. Deputy Smith.
Thank you very much. Just like to thank all of the contributors and the submissions. I think if this pandemic has done one thing, and I think it's done a great job in quantifying just how, you know, in euros and cents and jobs and numbers. It's gone a great way just to quantify how important the arts industry is to us in that sense. I mean, a lot of us share our experience through our family, people who are working in the industry, but to see the value of it in economic terms, and to present that to a committee like this and to have us be able to support that towards a July stimulus plan and beyond, I think is vitally important. An awful lot of the issues that I wanted to raise have been raised already, and I don't want to repeat them, but just if I could maybe have a comment on how a model would exist of long-term funding that would include grant aid, direct payments, charitable donations and tax incentives. Are we there yet where we have a clear model on that? Because it's, you know, sometimes those methods aren't, bedfellows. So sometimes, you know, so if they're to interact with each other, I myself would like to be clear on them so we can support them as much as possible. Secondly, I mean, it is clear that the wage subsidy scheme and the PUP payment will have to be extended for this industry. Similar to aviation, we just know that there are elements of this industry, large elements, that just won't be able to come back as quick as, you know, barbers and hairdressers and restaurants and pubs have this week. So I and my group will be supporting that in writing to the new minister. And just finally, in terms of, you know, 72% of artists earning less than the national minimum wage, presumably an awful lot of them will be supporting themselves with you know, a primary job or a secondary job. Has there been any quantification or given to how many you feel will just be lost to the industry through this? I mean, have you been contemplating that? Have you been able to put that into any kind of numbers at the moment? How many do you feel will just have to exit and turn their back on it, both direct artists and indirect workers, support workers? I've questions in relation to local authorities, but I understand Deputy Gannon is going to ask them, so I won't crowd my contribution with that. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to see around the Dáil Chamber how many people got to get to their barbers so far, now that they're open. I would look at the art sector like a house of cards in terms of funding, and not the HBO show. It's the house of cards that the arts sector and events and festivals fund themselves by, are able to put on work by and support and pay artists with, is in my own, I'll just speak for my own organisation, we are part funded by the Arts Council. We then use that funding to develop programmes, and then we can access sometimes international funding for parts of that programme, but a big part of the third part of that funding is ticket sales and sponsorships. Because there are no events, we have nothing to offer sponsors. Because a big chunk of our annual event, Ireland Music Week, will go online. So we have far less pouring opportunities to offer drink sponsors, far less opportunities to make it an attractive element. So in terms of just plain speaking on an organisation by organisation basis, that means we have a reduced capacity to hire Elaine's event company, who we work with. It means we have a reduced capacity to generate any sponsorship, which typically, because the Arts Council funding we get is about 2/3 of what we need to stay open as an organisation, that is also the funding that generates us to be able to stay open for the rest of the year as an organisation. So when you take away ticket sales and then you take away the sponsorship opportunities, you are left with, you know, it's not like everybody gets 100% funded in the arts sector, and that happens with the national resource organisations, it happens with local events and festivals. So if any one of those cards comes under threat, the whole house falls. So the only opportunity, and this is why the National Campaign for the Arts looked for so much money for artists to get funding, is because the organisations and events aren't hiring them and paying them. The second is for the Arts Council to be able to intercept and see where those key organisations are under threat now because they can't generate ticket sales. Like, you know, Project Arts Centre, 50% of their income is non-funded. so that events like ours, venues like that, are left wide open to, as a lot of the deputies today have talked about, is dissemination but also evacuation. If we can't be supported to keep our card going so that we're in the position when we re-emerge to then generate other funding through our events and hire our colleagues in the events industry, and then it will be a very bleak landscape, because we are innovative, we are intelligent, we've all referred to that. And I think if those three areas can be helped in any way, so a tax regime to make wider types of sponsorships and wider types of organisations to invest in an organisation just to exist, so that we don't have to always be looking for sponsorship for events. So I think it's a suite, and referring back to the previous deputy's question, all of this can be worked out in a task force along with a timeline, because the other big threat to organisations is that they don't know how long they have to budget for without those two lanes of income.
Thank you. Mr. Dunne, did you want to come in? I appreciate we've gone slightly over, but...
Thank you, Chair. I suppose while EPIC and the people we represent are the same as who Angela represents, we are also very different. You know, for us as an industry to put 5 artists on the stage in Croke Park or Slane, it takes about 2,000 staff to do that. The staff call for Electric Picnic is about 4,000 people. It's 4,000 taxpayers. You know, we are the same, but you asked about non-funded versus funded. We are 0% funded as it stands. And that is why we have, you know, the list of asks that we do. And we're not actually asking really for funding. What we're asking for is, you know, as we reopen, as we come back up to 25% capacity, to 50% capacity, that we are given the time through the PUP, through the wage subsidy scheme, through rates breaks, through a reduction in VAT, to allow our business to recover. And that is desperately needed. And I suppose, to reiterate an earlier point, it's desperately needed now rather than in a budget in October.
Thank you, Mr. Dunne. I see, Ms. O'Connor, had you tried to come in earlier on this point, or was it in an earlier point you had indicated that you wanted to come in? I'm sorry, it's a little bit difficult when we're in the different rooms to know who wants to come in.
I actually got it covered, thank you.
Good, thanks. Okay. Deputy Gannon.
And thank you to the contributors. I do want to go back to the local authority fund, and it seems to be a point that's been emphasised several times during the contribution here. I fully appreciate the importance of local authority funding to the arts. Is there a fear, is there an anxiety that somehow the local authorities won't be funding the arts over the next year? Is that a fear? Can you tell us where that fear is coming from?
Authorities are going to remove funding from their local community events and right up to any of the other types of events that they support. So that would be a nationwide impact, and that would obviously impact everything from any sort of activity taking place in a local theatre right down to presumably our Christmas tree lighting events coming in at Christmas.
And that fear is one that is there anything given that fear or fueling that fear? Have local authorities suggested that that's going to be the case?
I'm not 100% sure. I'd say just looking at how, well, from my experience over the last 15 years, and particularly with the crash in 2010, events are always the first to go. You know, it makes sense. A lot of the community events come out of discretionary funds throughout the local authorities. One would assume they're going to be reduced significantly, so that's going to put a lot of pressure on them. In addition to that, as I mentioned, they're actually organisers themselves. They need to adjust how they do business, and they need to adjust how they work with the organisers outside their organisations. So there's a huge amount of additional cost there in the actual delivery, planning for them, and then sustaining events going forward that are outside their current remit themselves.
Thank you. I just want to move on to a different question. It's also to the EIAI. You mentioned, it's a really important point, the recent funding won't filter down through the industry ecosystem. Can you elaborate on that statement, and perhaps if you can suggest maybe alternatives or even additional funding streams that might benefit the industries or the people that EPIC represents or the Event Industry Association, how that funding can benefit your organisations?
of our presentation, we have a diagram of an iceberg, and not to diminish anything at all that has happened here today, but I guess we're trying to point out that events and the arts and the entertainment and everything else is really at the top end of that iceberg. There's an awful lot going on behind it that needs to be supported as well. We've put forward a number of recommendations in our submission that would cater for a lot of these things, but as you can see, it's just a huge amount of work is required, meaningful work. You know, we need to start with a blank page and work the practicalities, the viability, the economics, and every element of this to make sure that we can pull it together, deliver the safe events, and actually be able to, I suppose, have a fallback plan. You know, should something change in the future, we need to have some sort of concrete certainty that when we plan events and invest in them, that they're actually going to be deliverable at the end.
In relation to the roadmap that doesn't exist yet, who should be in the room when that roadmap is being developed? I'm very conscious a lot of the decisions that have been made over the last couple of months, important decisions, haven't had particular sectoral interest in the room. So who should be in the room when those decisions are being made?
Well, we have suggested that this is an industry-led roadmap, so obviously my colleagues here today, we'd be looking towards our stakeholders within the statutory agencies, on Garda Síochána, HSE, HSA, etc. We need guidance and clarity first with regard to what is expected from the industry. We need to provide the stakeholders with our expertise with regard to what is possible and viable out on the ground, and then practically working those into a workable roadmap to recovery that will work for all parties in the industry.
Thank you. I just want to ask any of the contributors, how's the engagement been between the artists community and the freelance technicians and all the arts community with the Department of Social Protection in relation to the PUP payments or the SSW over the last couple of months? Has there been one where you have felt respected?
We went to the department through the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Arts Culture Heritage. It's changed now again, I've already forgotten the old name. We had very early on submissions. We had one day we had a 500 person Zoom call, and I think probably over 400 of those individuals had problems. When we went to the department, they were really quick to set up a dedicated helpline to help people to qualify and to help people with the problems. So they were dealing directly with the Department of Social Protection on artists' behalf.
Thank you.
I believe Mr. Dunne wanted to come in response to one of your questions, Deputy Gann.
It was just, I suppose, just on that point, we are hearing from a lot of the sole traders in particular, so people who are stage technicians, you know, lighting designers, safety officers, event controllers, etc., that they have had quite a bit of difficulty with it, and a lot of it does go back to, you know, that they weren't working in January and February, and they've had a lot of problems with it, and there has been a bit of pinging around of contacts within the Department of Social Protection. I think it is starting to fix itself, but it has taken some time. Just to go back to an earlier question from the Deputy with regards to the funding that's been already allocated and how it would go into the wider industry. The Arts Council are unapologetic in representing creators and artists, and they're right. That's what they do, and that's what they do well. But to go back to the earlier points, you know, you look at a large-scale show, an outdoor show, be it in Páirc Uí Chaoimh or Pierce Stadium or Croke Park or the RDS, or even a 3-arena show or whatever, 4 or 5 artists and creators on that stage, 1,000 staff, maybe 2,000 staff, 4,000 staff at Electric Picnic. That Arts Council funding, and with the greatest of respect, and I genuinely mean that, with the greatest of respect, it will only touch a fraction of those people. And that is what the EIAI and ourselves in EPIC are talking about. We're not asking you to not fund the Arts Council. In fact, give them more. They do a fantastic job and they are grossly underfunded. But what we are saying to you now is that the wider industry, the non-funded sector, all the staff, all the SMEs associated with that, they need a raft of supports to survive over the next 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months.
Thanks very much, Mr. Dunne, and thank you, Deputy Gannon. Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chair and the committee, for agreeing to my request to have this session and to get EPIC and the NCFA in. And I think it's hugely important our voices are heard. And I mean, there's a terrible irony in the current situation, it seems to me, which is that never more has our society needed arts and music and culture in order to sustain itself in a difficult time, and realised its value even through its absence because of missing going to gigs and live events. So its value and importance has been underlined tenfold by the current situation, but it's facing an existential threat to its existence, and all of the people front of stage and behind the scenes facing an existential threat. And I think you've made your case fantastically well, and I hope the government listen about how important it is to sustain you all through this situation, however long it lasts. And I think, you know, obviously a lot of the economic arguments have made, and I don't want to go over that because I think you've made them so well. I'd love you to talk a little bit about the human impact of all of this on the artists and the people behind the scenes whose livelihoods are now threatened in a fundamental way. I mean, at some of the Zoom meetings we all attended recently, people were pointing out that people who play in the pubs, like in Temple Bar, would have pre-COVID got 130 quid for a 2-hour set. As we speak, they're being told they might get 30 quid for 2 hours. Right? That's just not sustainable, and it's incredibly demoralising for those people. And they need the payment, and they need a guarantee now that the pub payment will be maintained until their livelihoods can recover. But maybe that's just one example I can think of, and Brezzy at the meeting we had online was talking about the mental health impacts for people of having mortgages and bills and not knowing what's coming down the line at them given the current situation. So I'd like maybe all the contributors to just talk about that mental health impact, the anxiety, the human consequences for people front and back on stage. And the other thing I just wanted to ask about is the role that you might see the broadcasters, the public service broadcasters, the national broadcaster and so on, in having in all of this. One of the things that was said again and again at the meetings is that we should have a minimum amount of original domestically produced content on the national broadcaster to sort of encourage original content production and performers and so on here. Maybe you could just comment on that demand, and even for funds for the production of original content, and maybe just a little bit more on the payment for online work, because that was something else that featured quite a lot at the meetings we had.
If I could take the effect on people from individuals who are not sure how long their payments are going to last, that are looking at children going back to school in September and uniforms and book lists, and then looking down towards Christmas, no idea whether they're going to have money to pay their mortgages, buy their Christmas presents, from our SMEs who have no idea of how long they've got to budget for. They're going to their banks, they're not getting much help there. These people are really suffering. We're an industry of people who come up with solutions, and we have no control. We can't come up with a solution. All of us on our committee, and I'm sure on the other committees, have had really, really sad and painful phone calls from people who have just closed their businesses, can't see the light of day, don't know how long it's going to go on for. And the mental health issues, you know, Brezzy is our spokesman who speaks very, very ably to that, much better than I can. But one of our asks is some funding for that mental health campaign, that mental health support for our members. Because as I say, we're an industry of doers, and we can't do it at the moment, and we can't see when we're back doing that. And it has a really bad effect on people's morale. Thank you.
I would speak to exactly the same experience as Sophie. We have had hundreds of artists who don't know when they can make work again. We have the same conversations as Epic and Elaine have, which is people just being forced to look at other jobs and having to migrate out of the sector, and that will have a really devastating long-term effect on the sector. And Shane referred to it earlier. I think the mental health impact is similar to the mental health impact of everybody in this country. COVID was a devastating time, but while sectors of our country are getting back to work and have light at the end of the tunnel, you can't overestimate the impact on artists and workers and organisations and companies in the event sector when they don't know how long the tunnel is, never alone where the light may come from. And I think although it may not seem like much, the only thing we can immediately offer everybody in our sector is the extension of the PUP payment, because that at least allows them the opportunity to stay in the sector and to work and to contribute to how the sector might come back. I think the second question on broadcasters is there's two elements that came up from our sector in terms of artists making money from their work. And I think more Irish artists on daytime radio, which pays the most, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is an absolute must. And I think that's why broadcasters need to be on any task force. I think this is something, and we should follow France and New Zealand, where their country is coming together in terms of strands coming together and building so that right hands and left hands move at the same time, and building strategies where everybody benefits. And the other element that came through very strongly from artists is that the Fair Pay Article 13 initiative that's been pushed through and Ireland have supported in the European Commission, is that we as a country call for that to be revisited and to be expedited. We should, because those companies all live here. So the fair pay to artists for online work, I think, needs to be a priority of the next government as well. And I suppose we should remember that artists and those working in the event sector have the same challenges as everybody else. There's childcare, there's health, there's mortgages, rent, and as all of these get more and more difficult, and as some banks today were refusing people mortgages and loans while they were on the PUP, we will be, as Shane and Elaine and Sophie have referred to, we were the first out. We will be the very last sector back. So the impact that these initiatives have on society at large are not being felt by artists alone, they're being felt by everybody, but we will be the last to come back from them, or even know when there's a possibility of coming back from them.
I'd just like to add, if possible, a very minor detail onto what Angela said, and I echo every single thing that she has said, but just to give you an example, we've spoken to a number of SMEs within the sector in the last couple of weeks, and I think it's the thing with SMEs in general across all sectors, but they're viable, profitable, successful businesses. The one thing that SMEs don't have is large stores of cash. They don't have massive reserves. That's why they're SMEs. What we're hearing and what we're finding in the recent days is that where they have had a 3-month, loan break, or possibly up to 6 months, be it for €1 million worth of equipment or PA that they maybe have recently purchased, what they're being told is that they will now have to pay those 6 months in 2021. So in 2021, they will have to pay 18 months of payments instead of 12. In a year when they will not have any money, most likely, until the end of the summer season, should we get a summer season. So, this is, you go back to the mental health issue, these are businesses with 4, 5, 20 staff. They're worried about their staff. They're worried about their own bills. They're worried about their children, childcare costs, mortgage costs, and they're worried about their business. In a lot of cases where they've spent 5, 10, 25, 45 years building up that business, they're watching it crumble in front of them with little or no help from the banks or insurance companies, but I think that's probably a whole other day's discussion. But Sophie touched on it. What they need is support now and a little chink of light at the end of the tunnel, which will help them, immeasurably over the coming months.
As in the SME and an industry with a staff of about 40, I can see the stress on my team, and a lot of them are at home sitting twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the next event. And as I mentioned before, these people are passionate about their game. They're highly skillful. And when we think about the great big event we had here, the gathering a number of years ago, and the next gathering in 2023, where everyone around this table made a contribution to that, it's a huge industry. There's huge talent, and we have to protect that talent both mentally and physically and financially. And yes, as Shane say, some of my staff, they've babies, they've childcare, they have mortgages to pay. And when I hear, the banks going stressful and not giving mortgages, and I have a number of people on my team who just got married and want to build houses or buy houses or do stuff like that, it's a huge stress, a phenomenal stress. And rest assured, and I know from the industry, and I can't help it, there's a huge talent, there's a huge passion to be the best in the world in this industry. And I think we are the best in the world because we have the skill, we have the chat, we have the crack, and we know how to deliver a top-class product.
Thank you, Mr. Mongey, and thank you, Deputy Boyd Barrett. Deputy Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you to our contributors today. I think we've spent a number of weeks now in this committee analysing the pathway into COVID and how we handled the nursing homes and all of that, and now we're actually looking at the devastation that's been wrought economically and how we're going to maybe move ourselves out of it. And I think today is probably one of the most telling days in terms of the overall effect on our SME community and our privately employed, and the challenges just seem to be getting greater and greater, but that's not to say that we can't overcome them, but we're going to have to work together. Just a couple of things, Mr. Mongey. I've long been an admirer of your business, and certainly at the Ploughing Championships, the digital equipment that you supply. But one of the things that struck me for companies such as yourselves, a lot of that equipment, I know sound and lighting and digital equipment is bought on lease purchase, and those companies are very difficult to do any, once you've engaged in a lease purchase, it's very difficult to get any change to that contract without major financial penalties. And I'm just wondering, how is the industry surviving in that sector? I'd say a lot of capital is purchased that way, a lot of capital equipment.
Deputy, it's a struggle. In fairness to the banks, they've given a 3-month moratorium, but the leasing companies, they want their money, simple. And that's why I'm saying that I think grant aiding would be a huge contribution to that, to get us over the hump for the next couple of years, or a long-term loan even at zero rate would be a huge contribution. But when you go to a bank looking for a loan, you don't be going through the hoops and the bureaucracy. I mean, a simple VAT return will show you in any business in this sector of the collapse of the industry. And I think if we could use some sort of grant aiding for people in the industry, particularly to pay for their stock and to help with financing, would make a huge contribution.
Yeah, I'm sure. And one of the other things I'd wonder is whether or not the banks where people are running into difficulty, are the banks putting that on the credit bureaus? Because I know lease companies are very, very difficult in that respect, and a lot of these sole traders would find it difficult now to meet payments and to get extensions to payments and all of that. But I think it's very unfair that people have been forced into this situation, suddenly find their credit rating has been impacted. Could I ask you just maybe some of the events people there about fund fairs, which I know they're probably an adjunct, but I think there was only one insurance company providing insurance, the Showman's Guild Insurance, was it, over the last couple of years. And this was a huge problem even before COVID was coming. I know in my own constituency in Tramore, where we have the amusement park, this is an ongoing issue. And I'm just wondering, have you, again, had any discussions with any departments or got any kind of solace at all with respect to insurance?
Having had a conversation with the Showman's Guild myself now in the last few days, I'm not aware that there's been any communication there. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to point out that fun fairs and amusements are particularly challenging. They have a huge amount of equipment that needs to be maintained for the duration of time to make sure that their certificates remain valid, and they have other challenges that are slightly harsher than the event industry from the perspective of proximity and social distancing and things.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, and we'd be aware of those. And again, we've spoken here today about the need, I think, for everybody who's contributed to the conversation today, I feel needs to be coming together to make a very strong statement on certain areas. We spoke about it earlier on, but insurance is a key issue for the SME sector. With respect to festivals then and social distancing, have you any insight as to the outdoor festivals this year, how they're going to be impacted? Certainly if we're opening up Spree as a festival again in Waterford, which we haven't had the go-ahead on it as yet. It is supported by the Arts Council. That's normally the August bank holiday weekend, and I'm just wondering, has anybody any insight or been told that just you can start getting ready for some of this?
suppose the short answer, Deputy, is no. What we have at the moment is a ban on events over 5,000 up until the 31st of August, and we have the roadmap which just runs to the 20th of July, which is open to correction, 100 people indoors and 500 outdoors at that point. I think the outdoor industry, be it festivals or standalone events, is very much dependent on social distancing coming from 2 metres to 1 metre. I don't think we have any opportunity at 2 metres. At 1 metre, we think we can, with these supports in place, also look at some outdoor shows. These are hypothetical discussions, really, but at 1 metre, we can potentially do a show for 3,000 or 4,000 people where we would normally do 20,000 people. But outdoors, you have that ability. Unfortunately, in the Abbey or the Olympia or the Three Arena, we can't move the walls. So your capacity is restricted, and that's it. I mentioned earlier about we might do insurance another day, but now that it's been brought up, I'd just like to mention one thing on it. You mentioned about only one insurer looking after fun fairs. In the last couple of years, we've seen an amount of insurance companies in Ireland get out of the event industry. They don't cover it anymore. We're being insured or underwritten by companies internationally, and what we are finding this year is that events that thought they were covered for cancellation insurance and are covered for cancellation insurance as far as their policy goes are not being paid their cancellation insurance. And this is going to be a bigger issue in the longer term when we do reopen. Just to give a very, very quick example, something like the Gaiety Panto has an upfront investment of about €1 million. The show would normally start around July time with set build and costume actors coming in from August. If you get to the start of December or the end of November when the Panto starts, and be it due to a localised lockdown or a cast member coming down with COVID, there's no insurance to cover that now, and that'll be the same for people touring, for artists touring, for venues and all of the theatres. We need a plan for that, and we need the insurance companies to, if you'll excuse the strong language, to be pulled into line by government, because otherwise we are facing a long-term issue with regards covering it. As part of that roadmap for theatres, we will need a derogation on the social distancing on stage, as many European countries have already brought in. There are, beautiful moments in theatre. People kiss. Can't do that from 2 metres away. Can't do it from 1 metre away. So, this will have to be changed. But the insurance is a longer term problem, but it's one that we really do need to start working on straight away.
For the fact that 150 people in an aircraft are safe for 3 hours, and 150 people in the Abbey is a threat to life. It's nonsense, it seems to me. I mean, during the reign of clerics, the arts were supported. During the reign of medics, they seem to be left to go to the wall. But anyway, Deputy Collins.
Very much, Chairperson, and thanks to our guests. I see that I have a number of questions, and maybe more than you can answer here today, but maybe you can write back to us afterwards or to myself afterwards and see. I know the Department of Arts now has come under Media, Tourism, Sports and Gaeltacht, and I'm extremely disappointed that the islands have been taken away, because the islands and the Gaeltacht are very much one and one, and that has been split, and I don't think it's a very positive move, to be honest with you. But it is vital that Ireland sustains, and I have the number of questions here, and I'd appreciate some you might answer in a minute, sustains and grows its reputation as a great place to do business of arts and culture. And the responsibility lies with the Department of Finance, the Department of Culture, Heritage and Gaeltacht, and the others, that's been renamed, to introduce tax incentives for investment across the arts and cultural sector. In all art forms, incentives to win programmes and partnerships will keep Ireland competitive in this landscape. Do you believe it would be of benefit to artists and art workers and arts organisations? And that's the first question. Second one is, I have found when there's recent announcements of funds being made available, they do not get to the people who need it, basically the people on the ground. To explain this in detail, it was announced recently that farmers would get up to 50 million, a 50 million package, which was most welcome, as we thought, but as always the devil was in the detail, as most hard-working farmers who desperately needed funds are not able to access that fund. The government has announced in the past 2 weeks a 25 million arts and culture COVID-19 emergency package. Have your members accessed this funding And is it freely available to all? That's the second question. And there is well over 7 million lost to the arts sector due to cancelled events, and God knows what that figure will be by the end of this summer. Have the government given any indication they will continue to support all freelance artists and art workers through the pandemic unemployment payment until mass gatherings are permitted again? And the next question is, Indigo National Audience survey indicates that arts and culture sector will be the last to return to full capacity and will need support to ensure survival and recovery. The arts will be fundamental to Ireland's recovery, impacting across society in many different ways, including the economy, education, tourism, health and well-being. Have the government given you any assurances that any equitable portion of the European Commission's structural funding is committed to the arts and culture sector? And two more questions. Events again, like the hotel sector, do you believe that a reduction in the VAT and funding for viable event business would ensure the longevity of the business? And events, this is the final question, whether it be a concert event or other, it doesn't matter. But the tens of thousands of our Irish people, their biggest event of the day and the week is to attend their church, no matter what their religion. Some churches can cater for 500 people plus, so they have the government have still only allowed them 50 people, and as we said here, 150 can go in an aircraft. Have you any comments on that only 50 can be allowed into churches, which is a great disappointment to many people?
Deputy, I'm going to maybe answer a couple of those questions briefly before I hand it to Angela, who I think is probably better positioned to answer a number of them. But, you know, in relation to the 7 million lost and the money not coming down, I think it's just, again, it's important to clarify that you are talking to two different sectors here, the same in that we kind of do the same thing, but you know there is a funded sector, which is where that money from the Arts Council went, and there is a non-funded sector, you know, which is all of your community events and all of this stuff, right up to Electric Picnic and, you know, be it the Spice Girls in Croke Park, you know, and everything in between. Where the VAT will help us, I suppose, is that we're going to open at a reduced capacity. So any savings that we can make to help us with a reduced capacity whenever we do open will help. You know, currently, you know, we pay VAT on a ticket at 13.5%. We've asked for that to come down to 5%. An old accountant of mine, you know, used to say half a loaf for no bread. And I think in this instance, what you're looking at is 5% of something is better than 13.5% of nothing. You know, there's just, I think, two of the points. There was a few questions there, Deputy. I couldn't even write them down kind of quick enough, but I'll hand over to, I think it's because we're both from Cork, and even I couldn't keep up with you. But I'll hand to Angela. I think she can answer a few of them.
I'm loving the Murphy. I think there's the detail in the Arts Councils. So the department got 25 million, 20 million of that was given to the Arts Council, and there is comprehensive detail of how the Arts Council plan to spend that in the Survive, Adapt, Renewed document. The breakdown of that and the having sat on the committee, the genesis behind it was to get it out to the sector as quickly and efficiently as possible. I know as a part-funded organisation and client of the Arts Council, they have already written to us to ask us to put back in our budget for the end of the year so that they can identify if, as a resource organisation, we will need support. I know they've done that to a lot of venues, a lot of theatre companies, a lot of other resource organisations and art centres around the country. 9.2 or 9.3 million of that will be given out in a suite of bursaries directly to artists, and I know that the detail of the Arts Council's proposal looks at broadening out who that can reach, so that it's not, you don't have to have been funded already, and that new bursaries will be made available, and some bursaries will speak to where artists have gone during COVID. So there will be some bursaries, I understand, for organisations and individuals to adapt to working online. In terms of taxation, I think my colleague Aideen is a better place to answer that, but I think the detail and some of the work already being done by Benefax will be of huge benefit to the sector in terms of how taxation, VAT and everything will work right across the SMEs and the arts organisations in the sector.
To follow up on that, Deputy, the recent Arts Council advisory report, which was published a few weeks back, has very useful language in relation to taxation, which could inform any new reviews. So they're calling for a review of taxation practice as it relates to the arts in Ireland and internationally, in order to make recommendations around the tax regime, which would include an examination of VAT, gifting to the arts and possible measures on artists' incomes. Because I think, as we've discussed earlier, you'll find there's great capacity within the sector to raise money, but without a regime change, that won't be worth much.
Deputy, I'll attempt, I don't think I can, but with regard to your question about mass, you know, my mother, I know, for instance, is very anxious to get back up to the church, but what I would say is that the Theatre Forum, ourselves, most people we've spoken to, were disappointed with the guidelines with regards to indoors, because they don't take into account scale. So, you know, it's 50 people indoors, but that's 50 people in a 400-seat theatre, or 50 people in the 3 Arena, which seats 9,500. You know, we would have been of the opinion that it should have been done, you know, on a case-by-case basis, or, you know, a percentage of capacity, or where you can adhere to 1 metre or 2 metre social distancing, depending on what is the case. That kind of, I guess, answers your question. You know, there are certain churches that can take 500 people comfortably, and some can only take 50.
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear there's any legal restriction in churches, though. I don't think there is. At least it was clear there wasn't in the last regulations. These ones, I don't know whether there are regulations in being at the moment, but I mean, it may be an insurance issue. They may be, you know, obviously everybody is free to determine whether they open or not, but that's a different issue. Deputy Collins, you've concluded, have you? Sorry? Well, yeah, I mean, we're not under the same pressure for time, because some people have gone down to the convention centre for votes that may or may not be called. I don't know. Deputy Clerk, you have 10 minutes, and thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your patience. I'm sure some of our contributors here today, it's your first time in front of a committee, but it's for my first time to sit in a committee, so we're all kind of finding our feet. There's what I would like to say initially is that I noted from the submissions some very harrowing realities that are facing our arts and entertainment industry. I noted from the Abbey that stated that funding had not returned to pre-2008 levels. The EY research that stated that the arts sector is facing a decline of 42% compared to a wider economy of 11%. And it's very clear the understanding behind the Arts Council statement that the arts industry is the least confident in its ability to operate through COVID-19 and beyond. My take on this is very clear. There is no doubt in my mind that this is a pivotal time for the arts and the entertainment sector. There is no doubt that this sector is not only under severe pressure, but it's actually in very real danger in some areas. I would be very concerned around the viability, sustainability, the loss of valued skills directly and indirectly associated with the sector, and obviously the economic loss that comes with it. But the impact of those loss of skills would actually reach out into other areas that are not strictly related to the arts, but into programmes like the Creative School programmes or Creative Ireland programmes that, while community-based and not professional, they are wholly reliant on professional input to actually make them happen in the first place. And I was speaking with the manager of the Backstage Theatre in Longford. My constituency is Longford Westmeath. I'm flittered with opportunities to engage in the arts and the entertainment sector, from festivals to theatres. We have an abundance of them, and we have an abundance that are being hugely impacted as they try and come out of COVID-19. My hometown of Mullingar, we have no FLA this year. That FLA would have sustained our local arts centre for at least 2 years. But what the manager of the Backstage Theatre said to me this morning was they have an artist in residence. She's actually a playmaker, and her project is to work with the local children in If I could start with yourself, please. Regarding your social distances, I did reference Mullingar Arts Centre there earlier on. What they are now looking at doing is extending the term, the number of shows that they can put on for their Christmas pantomime. They're reducing the attendees, but they're not increasing the ticket sales. And to me, the ticket price, to me, this is a reflection of the dedication of those who work in this area, that they are determined to put this on come hell or high water. But the reality is that it's not sustainable. From a financial perspective, it's certainly not sustainable. And the only guaranteed income that they have every year is from the local authority. And if that was to be withdrawn, I wouldn't like to think of what the outcome of it was. And again, as the backstage theatre, like with a capacity of 212, they, due to social distancing, will be able to stage something for 17 people. That completely removes the enjoyment for anybody when you're sitting so far away that it takes the crack almost out of going. It removes a layer of why it is that people go to these events. But what I would like to know, Angela, is this. In terms of measures such as this, how replicated is this across the country? Like, I know my art centre, the week before the closure, had over 2,700 kids engaged in one means or another. It's a phenomenal figure because of the outreach that they do into rural towns and communities. And the concerns I would have would include the fact that if these were to stop, they're never coming back. And if that were to be the case, we are going to lose a generation of potential hosiers, of potential actors, of potential event managers, and that to me is a real shame. And I'm also curious, Angela, to know is if you have an actual figure for those involved in the sector that didn't receive any financial support during COVID, either due to the work practice or the case of being over 66. If you don't mind, Angela, I'm going to keep going because I have another couple of questions for the other contributors, and you may be able to swap over. Shane, I noticed in your submission that you aren't usually in the habit of asking for help, that you kind of fly under the radar, so to speak, when events are being managed. But the reality is an event's not going to take place without you in the background. You did reference rebates and the pandemic unemployment, and you actually referenced something that's come up quite a bit to me, and that's the percentage of the capacity as opposed to the number of the capacity. But your submission mentions help. Outside of rates, rebates and the pandemic payment, what does help actually look like to you? If you were to say, for this sector to continue to be viable, to ensure that that €6 for every €1 that's invested continues to flow into our economy, what specific supports would you like to see being put into your non-funded side of the sector? And finally, Elaine, if I could, I noticed in your submission that you reference a bustling calendar. A bustling calendar is certainly something that happens, as I said, in my constituency. But the manager of the Dean Crowe Theatre in Athlone mentioned something to me that I actually found very concerning, and it's the difficulties that they are having around developing a programme of events into the future, because of the hesitancy of promoters and artists to actually book with them, because of their sense of a lack of security of the viability of employment in the sector. My take on this is that without a comprehensive and without a very structured support package being put in by government, that this is something that we're going to see replicated across the country. And again, it goes back to that loss of talent, that loss of skills, and fundamentally erodes the foundations of our arts and entertainment industry if we are going to lose people into permanent employment in sectors non-related to it. Is this something that you are hearing elsewhere? Is this unique to that one? I don't think the answer is going to be yes. But how prevalent do you think something like this is? How is the government's most recent announcements actually putting some confidence back into the fears that those who work in the sector may have about this being a viable career into the future?
I would agree with you in terms of what you're experiencing in Mullingar, and I also think there's something in the water in Mullingar, the amount of musical talent up there. I would say that yes, it's very much replicated around the 26 countries, 26 counties. Our experience is that funded art centres become pinnacles and centres of other arts activities, such as creative schools. What we found, we've all referred to the intelligence and the innovation in our sector. A lot of community and participatory arts practice has come online. And it's not the same, the experience isn't the same, but the sector has reacted really quickly to its audiences, and whether that's young choirs or old choirs, those centres have reacted rapidly, as have the artists who work on those. Our fear is that if those centres and those individuals and artists and residents aren't funded to exist, that anything that's available now at the moment will also evaporate, because you will see those people having because there's no work having to move into other sectors. So I suppose the other challenge for the art sector is we are seen as so robust and so well able to get on with things that there might be a laziness in not hearing us that this is a very, very, very important time to fund this sector. We can't be left on our own. We can't do it anyway. Now, this is not because the entire rug where we are able to sustain ourselves, which is public performance, has been pulled from under us. In terms of numbers, the numbers the Arts Council gathered for the first 3 months of COVID in their initial survey was that 12,000 events and activities were cancelled per month around the country, and I would say that echoes those numbers that you talked about in Mullingar and Westmeath and Longford. We would also say that the figure for activity will also evaporate unless those centres and local arts activities and local arts funding is maintained and sustained, and that those artists can maybe be given the opportunity to come off the PUP and to engage in full-time work again, albeit delivering that work online for the time being.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Clerk. I suppose we've gone through a number of them already, and I'll touch on them again, but there are practical additions to the PUP, you know, things like rent and mortgage support. These are key to everyone working in this sector. What we need to avoid is people being forced onto job seekers. They're not jobless. They are currently unable to work for a reason, you know, beyond their control. Once they end up on job seekers, we would be of the opinion, and I think we're all in agreement, that we will lose them, and we will lose them for good. The rest of it, you know, we've touched on already, but we do need immediately some kind of a roadmap, whether that is at the start of the tourism or the event industry task force that we've talked about already, and we need the rest of the requests. You know, a break in VAT. The insurance is a big one. You know, whether that becomes some kind of a national insurance, something that is government backed. To cover events, you know, because the insurance companies themselves are not going to do it, and it's going to be a very difficult industry for us to operate in, and that's for everybody. You know, that's for funded and non-funded. If we can't get some kind of a handle on insurance, we're going to have a major problem. But I think those practical additions would be great, but it really is. All of the asks, I think, need to come to fruition for this industry to come back and to, you know, to strive and to develop again, as it will, and we are confident it will, but it does need help and support immediately. Again, we've mentioned it in the July stimulus, so that we can get through this difficult time and come out the other side stronger.
Thanks, Shane.
From personal experience here to try and give you the best perspective I can on it. I have a 15-year-old company. It's multi-award winning. We specialise in the large-scale the production of large-scale public events. I personally have 20 years experience working in the industry, and as it stands at the moment, simply put, there's no incentive to stay in business. My staff are at home. I can't offer them any direction as to when, where, how I can offer them work. I had interns lined up coming out of third level institutions to try and get experience within industry. That's not going to happen. When I look towards my clients, which include private, corporate and local authorities, no one has any direction. So as it stands at the moment, when I assess the situation, I find it really hard to see how, why, or any, to be honest, possibility of me remaining in business without supports, full stop.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Deputy by Barrett, you had wish to come back in.
Yeah. Listen, I just want to thank you all for a very powerful presentation. And I think there seems to be a very sympathetic ear from everybody here, and hopefully we can discuss how the committee can put forward recommendations arising from what you've said. And the one you just mentioned, Chair, I think is a very good one, because it is a bit baffling, isn't it? That you know, 50 people in the, what is it called now? I used to call it the Point. What do they call it now? The Three Arena, sorry, yeah. And 50 people.
In the Abbey or in the Pro.
Exactly, yeah.
St. Patrick's Cathedral or wherever.
Yeah, so that, I mean, for us just to engage with NEFIT and who is it, the HSA, about to ask that simple question.
NEFIT and the HSA, sorry, I know.
Yeah.
We're in a chair, we're in a committee, we're not having a conversation, but they don't make the laws. The minister, the outgoing minister made this law. There's now a new Minister for Health who has the power to change the law, annul the law, you know.
Yeah, well, maybe so, but I think they're possibly taking guidance from public health authorities, but it's something we could maybe try to get to the bottom of and see what the rationale is, because there doesn't seem to be a consistent rationale behind that. But do you think that, I mean, that would make some difference, but it still wouldn't solve your problem until we get back to normal, isn't that right? And so either way, the supports, which you certainly have my support, and I think judging from the response, there's a lot of support here for these. So I just want to commit to push them forward as much as possible on your behalf. But just one last question. It is a kind of, you know, broader question. But why do you think, given that, you know, art and live entertainment are such a central part of the cultural fabric of this country? They are so beloved of everybody in this country. They are so badly needed. We've seen that ever more during this crisis, but most people know it most of the time, that you are such an overlooked sector and you're so far down the pecking order when it comes to getting support. I mean, it's a curious irony to me that is the case, and I hope today and your campaigning, which has been fantastic, will start to begin to remedy that. But I'm just curious as to why it is the case, or what's your view on why we have that irony of something that's so important, so valued and so on, but gets so little support and is often way down the pecking order when it comes to things that are considered by the political system important.
Angela is ready to go with the answer to this one. Just very quickly from our side, it's so obvious in recent weeks. We've seen massive packages doled out in New Zealand and in Germany and in other countries. The arts in this country has been grossly underfunded for years, and now now here we are in COVID, and it's all the chickens are coming home to roost. I'm going to let Angela talk about the funded sector because she knows far more about it than I do. But from a non-funded point of view, why are we overlooked so much? We've never asked before. We are, I think it's in our EPIC submission. We are entrepreneurs, we are innovators, we are small businesses. We kind of, we go out there and we make things happen, and we do it off our own steam. And that applies to David Mongey, or to Mert Whelan, who's a PA company, or to Shield Staging in Cork, right up to Peter Aiken and MCD. They're all, they've done it themselves. And we've never asked before, and I suppose if you don't ask, you don't get. Well, we're here today and we're asking because we have no choice but to ask.
I do think, now, how long have you got? I don't know. But what I do know is that we are way down the European pecking order in terms of how much we invest in the arts. We are at between 0.1 and 0.2% when an average European country is at 0.6% of GDP in terms of investment. I think that in the past I can guess and make a personal observation in that the arts has always sustained itself because people who make art have to make art. Nobody makes art for there is a benefit that you can then make commerce from your art. But art is something that I think we have traditionally been asked by successive governments in this country to justify the economic value of art. And nobody ever asks us to justify the esoteric and societal value of the arts. And I think every last one of us saw that during COVID. I think we saw that the music, the TV, the books, all of those events from beautiful Irish artists brought to life on the internet or on TV. You know, we were all gripped by Connell's necklace on Normal People. We watched Ireland Performs. We're all still watching Courage, and we're buoyed and pacified and comforted by all of that. So you will never ever hear from the art sector that the arts aren't worth investing in, but we are still below funding in terms of where we were in 2008 when we were last cut. We are a sector right across the board that have been dying a death by 1,000 cuts, and we have still sustained. And I think we have a unique moment in time now as a society and as a republic to really look at ourselves in the mirror coming out of this COVID and look at what we value in society, and we need to put arts at the top of that. An economy runs. There are different parts of the economy that need help every now and again. We should never, as the arts, be asked to justify why the arts, the same as why education or why health. It should be immediately answerable, and we shouldn't really have to be collectively coming together here in a way that, you know, governments all over the world immediately responded to their arts and entertainment sectors. And if we as a country value our artists as much as we say we do and as much as we sell ourselves as a country on them, then we should invest in the infrastructure that sustains them, and we should invest in all the layers under the iceberg that produce the world-beating artists that we produce and the world-beating events that we produce.
I often wonder whether we value our artists or our dead artists. The dead ones are cheaper to value. Look, I'd like to thank you all for coming in, for sharing your stories, your testimony. It's been certainly enlightening and powerful. And I suppose with that, I would adjourn the committee until Thursday. And again, thank you all.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.